Hello and welcome back to Los Comics TV. I'm your host, Javier Hernandez. And today should probably be not a big surprise to people who know me really good or a long time as far as my interests. So if you folks have been wondering, hey, when's he going to do a Steve Ditko episode? Today is it. So let's get on with this look through. Well, it's not even through just yesteryear. It's 65-year career. I'm not going to cover it all today. That's what all the other episodes will be for in the future. But I want to give you an overview. If not an overview, maybe just like a sample taste test, right? Just to give you a little roundabout way of knowing this man's career and his influence on me. So I believe this is episode 10. And been looking forward to getting to this one for a while. So let's just start at the beginning. For me, at least, when I was a kid, my brother, I don't know if I've said this on the show before, but I know in plenty of the interviews I've told people. When I was a kid, my older brother Albert, he had a collection of comics. This one it was one of these, but I bought this again because you can tell the nice condition it's in. My original one's all ripped up and dog-eared and wonderfully read over and over again. So I probably bought this, 20 years ago. I just wanted a nicer copy. Because it's probably there was about 2 or 3 of these type of reprint books my brother gave me. So he was in high school at the time, and I guess he was not so much more into comics. So, I don't know, he had this collection, it's a stack like maybe that many. So, I don't know, 40, 50 comics. He had purchased them from 1968 to about 70 or 71, from all the copyright dates I could tell. So he gave them to me probably, I'm guessing maybe mid-70s. I was probably about at least old enough to, be able to take care of them and read them and appreciate them. So I was probably about 7 or 8 or something like that. So I read them over and over again. But amongst the collection was some of these Marvel tales which reprinted the earlier SpiderMan comics. This one's from 1968, and it reprints this issue from 1965. This is the original cover for that book. They reprinted it for Marvel Tales. They just added this box because it lists the other reprinted stories in here. But Jack Kirby was a big a big part of the collection. And of course random issues of X-Men, Daredevil, Batman, Superman, and there was some Spider-Man by the second artist on the book, John Romita. They were in that collection too. Fantastic art, wonderful artist. But there was something about these Ditko stories, and the great thing about Stan Lee with the credit. Who'd ever thought I'd say that, right? Well, making a credit box where he'd get the credit as the writer, but he'd also credit the artist. So, as a kid, oh, it's a Steve Ditko comic. So every time you see the art and the name, you start associating it. But this particular story, it's just a standard adventure. Spider-Man, Human Torch battle the Beetle. Actually, it's a Jack Kirby design, the Beetle, but he appeared in the previous comic. But he looks very Ditko-esque. Something about those long, creepy fingers and then the helmet with those just round bug eyes on there. But I remember reading this comic, right? So, as usual, the two heroes meet for the first... Well, it's not the first time they met, but they're both hot-headed teenagers. They start fighting, but they realize the Beetle's a real bad guy. So, there's this particular sequence that always... from the beginning, literally, it just captivated me, right? So they're chasing the Beetle into this building. So he flies in the window. And then next panel you see him going through a corridor. This is interesting design though, because the character is literally going into the next panel. Rips up some of the wall. Throws it at... Now check out this panel. So he throws it at the Human Torch. No, he throws it at Spider-Man. But at the same time the Human Torch flies in and takes the brunt of the hit. And Spider-Man flips out of the way. So there's 3 things going on in this panel, which is interesting as an artist. It's like you got the villain throwing something. The one hero is jumping out of the way. The other hero is taking the hit. So, and again, so now they're flying, the Human Torch goes out the hole that the Beetle made with that part. Then the Torch comes in another window. The Beetle's ripping off part of the ceiling. Again, he throws this piece, and then Spider-Man jumps in through the roof and hits it as the Torch also burns it. The Beetle flies off a corridor. Human Torch flies up out of the hole Spider-Man came under, and Spider-Man is jumping out a window. So, I mean, there's all this interesting action and going in and out, and, you know, you could, like, I always thought it'd be neat to construct a little model of the building. Like, I'm going to take the time to do that. And then map out how it worked. And when I was a kid, I would just try to figure that out in my head. So then he takes off. The heroes jump after, you know, they leave the building to go after him. And then the Beetle's coming down a hallway. The Torch burns a hole through the wall here. Spider-Man jumps through a window here, and they all collide. And then eventually Spider-Man webs them up in the fire cage, and he's caught. But I just remember spending a lot of time as a little kid, just these panels, just like trying to figure out, just mapping it out. You know, just the fact that Ditko staged it this way, it was enough to captivate me. And who knows, it may not even really work out. Like if we really had a model and like this guy comes out this way, but see, that doesn't matter in a comic. It's just the idea of it that gets swept up in the action. So besides staging his great action, the other thing that really stood out to me on the Spider-Man stories and really left an impression on me, right, was all the melodrama, right? He's a teenager with girl problems, you know, J. Jonah Jameson's, you know, well-had idiot bosses. I'm surprised there's not an Aunt May picture in here. She's always in the background, sick, you know, causing little Peter more grief. But, so yeah, this is like one of the first Ditko comics I ever read. So, eventually so this is the annual #1 from '64. This wasn't something I had as a kid. I bought this, I don't know, again, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you know, kind of a beat up copy, but and I don't know what it cost. I'm sure it wasn't more than 30 or 40 bucks. But this is one of my favorite Spider-Man comics from Ditko and Stan Lee. And the reason why, it's, okay, so, you know, it introduces the Sinister Six, which takes these previous 6 villains from the earlier issues, and they team up, right? Let's team up and get Spider-Man. So it's a 41-page story, which is amazing, right? Like, wow, double size, and you're getting six villains, and you know, again, like I was talking about the melodrama. Here's Aunt May looking at a picture of Uncle Ben. There's Spider-Man, the heartbroken teenager because his uncle's dead, moping about the uncle, reminiscing his origin. Basically, if he would have stopped that burglar from running, the burglar wouldn't have killed the uncle later. So that's one of the great stories, I think, origin stories. But the villains are meeting, and it's just this great Ditko storytelling, right? Like it's always very clear what's going on, yet it's drawn in a very, you know, it's what we call cartoony style, which I don't know what the best definition is, but it, you know, they're not realistically drawn, but they're definitely representational of, you know, they're supposed to be these six bad guys, 6 thugs, but there's a certain flair to it, right? And a very, very high drama. Like, look at the aunt. She looks she's so withered looking and anxious and, you know, worried. And, you know, the villains are mean and deadly, and we have the action, right? Again, you can just kind of map out where Spidey's going and jumping to and such. And so the great thing about this story, so there's 6 villains. So I guess it was Ditko's idea. Who knows? Maybe Stan suggested it, but whatever. You're getting these full panel splash pages, they call these, of where he's, you know, where he finally subdues each bad guy. There's Electro gets taken out, Kraven the Hunter, right? So I thought that was such a great idea to do that as a, you know, as part of the story. This is what, yeah, Mysterio is one of my favorite Ditko villains designs. This is one of my favorite images ever. Just the two characters just crashing into each other. You know, Spider-Man invading the space of this character and vice versa. Sandman. And then who we still got? Yeah, the Vulture. That's a neat one. And look at the city. The cityscape. It almost looks like letters. They say this about Jack Kirby too. It's like they're not like, you can't see this part of New York because it doesn't exist. But it doesn't really matter. All that matters is, well, this is what matters, the action. And yeah, they're above the city. So, okay, draw a city. It doesn't have to be exactly New York. Don't make it look like Kansas where it's all flat plains. But again, that's the storytelling part of it. And then Doc Ock in that big giant fishbowl, of course. So on top of this 41-page story, what does it say here on the cover? 72 big pages. So then Ditko ends up doing 30 or 31 pages of extras. So there's this thing called pinups. So it's all the various villains, the burglar from the first issue, right? The chameleon, the vulture. And these are all drawn for this issue. These pinups did not appear previously. Doc Ock, Sandman, Doctor Doom, Lizard, the Living Brain, Electro, Enforcers. So there's all these pinups, and there's all these extras, right? The secrets of SpiderMan, his origin again. How much weight can he lift? How he sticks on the walls. How high he can jump, whatever. His agility. Here's a cool thing Ditko would often do, right? Starts down here, and Spider-Man's swooping across the neighborhood. How Peter Parker designed his web shooter. How the web shooter works. It can be gooey. It can be like a spray. This is hilarious. He can make different things out of it. A shield, a parachute, skis. How the spider sense works. How the mask works, right? And a pinup of Spider-Man signed by Spidey. Wow, look at this. There's more stuff. The heel and heartthrob. J. Jonah Jameson, his enemy boss, and then his girlfriend, I guess, Betty Brant. I don't know if were they boyfriending. I don't remember. I know they're always, interested in each other. The classmates, Peter Parker's house, guest star page, right? The FF, a plug for other Marvel comics. This is fun too. How Stan Lee and Steve Ditko create Spider-Man. There's a Ditko self-portrait. There's Stan, and they talk about how they come up with the plots and such. So anyway, that's chock full of fun stuff in this book. But I'm not going to sit and review every Spider-Man comic. We'll be here all day. Eventually Ditko moved on to other things after Marvel. He's one of the first comic creators to do creator-owned work. Following Will Eisner, right? Will Eisner definitely owned the Spirit back in the 30s and 40s. But for Ditko to go from the top-selling book to self-publishing, or not self-publishing, but going through a small press independent publisher for his character Mr. A, and his and then he was interested in doing like philosophical comics, where he's actually sharing ideas on his philosophy. He was, I guess, what you call an objectivist. If you guys are familiar with Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, it's got people call it like a black and white philosophy. But Ditko was interested in, discussing the tenets of that philosophy, and, I guess he'd show what he saw in it, and maybe how other systems weren't as good. But whether we agree with the philosophy or not, I certainly agree with the great artwork and his interesting storytelling choices. Other books as a kid. So this came out in, I think, the early 70s. I was not aware of this. So again, this is something I bought, probably 10, 15 years ago. But, other books that I learned about Ditko early on were these little pocket books. Man, the writing is so tiny, but I guess to my 10-year-old eyes back then, it was fine. But I put it up to my nose right now. I can still not even make out the copy. But anyway, these reprinted 10 issues, or this one probably more because they're shorter stories. But I was able to read the whole early run of Doctor Strange. I think there's 3 volumes of this, and there was one for Spider-Man as well. So right off the top, as a young comic fan, I was able to pretty much get caught up to speed, at least on the original Doctor Strange and Spider-Man stories. As far as Ditko is concerned, I also did that with They had some Jack Kirby Fantastic Four reprints. And then there was these books. I think I mentioned some of these in a previous episode with the origins of Marvel Comics. There was this whole line of books Marvel was doing in the late 70s. So this is one of the ones I bought also at that Bookland, that shop uptown Whittier. And again, you know, it's the same stories from here, but easier to read, right? Larger format. But, you know, it was a great time to be a young comic fan because I'm, you know, getting comics off the rack, but I'm also able to read about, you know, the early stuff from 10 years before in my case. Of course, Ditko's worked on dozens, you know, must be 100 or 2 or 3 different comics throughout the decades. He did an issue of Man-Bat for DC Comics, right? So it's the one time he drew Batman. So this is the Batman villain, Man-Bat. But, yeah, his Batman shows up in here. His version of Batman, which is basically, you know, Batman. But what was neat about what he did, he kept them a lot in shadow, and like he'd block out the whole bottom part of the face would just be all black. So I don't think he saw that much up to this point in Batman's career, in Batman's history of being drawn. So that was a pretty neat innovation. But yeah, just the one time he's ever done a Batman story. I remember this in the early 80s. Pacific Comics was a new publisher. The Rocketeer, you may have heard of the movie. But there was a backup story in here by Steve Ditko. So again, it was cool to see it. So here's the Rocketeer story by Dave Stevens. Another classic comic book series, comic book creator. And Ditko right here, right? With that very unique, distinct Ditko cartoony style. You know, very interesting character design. The Missing Man, that's the Missing Man. That's it. That's him. 2 arms, 2 legs, and then so I guess you call it a face, but it's his hair, his glasses, and his mouth. Like if that isn't a, you know, totally unique character design, I don't know what is. It's one of Ditko's specialties. But right, another crazy fight scene where you can see through the guy and see the bad guys on the other side of him. Yeah, that's some crazy stuff. Yeah, get this. He did there was a Chuck Norris comic at Marvel under the Star imprint. Ditko drew it. Steve Ditko. He's drawn Chuck Norris before. Isn't that crazy? So again, I bought that secondhand at the time. I don't know what year this was. Probably the early 90s, late 80s. I was not aware of this when it came out. So about, I think about 15 years ago, we had this comic shop in LA for years and years. It just closed down like, 2 years ago, maybe a year or 2 ago. It was called Meltdown Comics on Sunset. And I'd been there before, but one time I was walking through the backside, you know, all the graphic novels, and they had this small stack of, you know, a couple of Steve Ditko books. So I pulled off the shelf and, oh, check these out. At the time, this was what? Early 2000s, mid 2000s. I hadn't seen much new work from him, you know, so I picked these up, and these were published in 1999 and 2000. And this is all this new stories I had not seen from him. I guess he had just done these to be collected in these books. So this is him in his later years, probably in his, at this point, his 60s. And focusing on black and white art. Look at this great page. Look at this 3-part sequence here. How you're zooming into the sky being, you know, well, I was going to say burned up, but it's too cold. So, but such a masterful use of just black and white. He's obviously Ditko's someone I look at a lot, because most of my at least the Muerto comics are in black and white, and you got to really figure out how you're gonna show something. You know, make it look nice and solid when you need to, but with only the black ink against the white color of the paper. So, and then, you know, there was other comics. By 2008, there was other comics being printed from Steve Ditko. So these books were, Ditko did them in partnership with his friend Robin Snyder. Robin Snyder would basically handle the publishing end, right? I'm not sure exactly how they work, but Ditko would, you know, probably most likely send him all the art or copies of all the art, and Snyder, you know, compile it little editing as far as some editorial content in the front and the back, and then package it and then get it off to the printer and distribute it. So they've had a partnership since I think the mid 80s, Snyder and Ditko. So in addition to seeing these books at Meltdown Comics, then I eventually noticed that they had, so in 2000, this is 2007, there's a new comic that came out at the time. And, well, I say a comic, but a new book. Because Dick was writing a lot of these. He's always written essays, actually, which Snyder has published. Challenging, some of the comic book industry at the time, or just philosophical, questions or conundrums or whatever you want to call it. Ditko would ponder and espouse on. But then the second follow-up was this one called Ditko, etc. And now you're starting to see more comic work, even though they are like, philosophical in nature. But, as things, the pages go on, you start seeing, oh, now look, this is more like a traditional comic book story with panels telling the story. And in this case, this character is called the Cape. He's literally just a cape. That is pretty awesome. The Gray Negotiator. Ditko's the hero. So by 2008, every couple of months, or maybe 3 or 4 times a year, another Ditko comic is coming out. So these started in 2007, and for a while I used to think, oh, it's kind of neat. He's in his 80s now at this point, and he's probably doing like just a few more comics to kind of finish off his career, but he ended up doing these for 10 years. So into his early 90s, he was still making comics. And I think this is the last one in the actual comic book run. This is number 26 of these, what they call the 32-page series, because each of these is 32 pages. So yeah, here we go. Like, this is Ditko in his, I guess it'd be like his late 80s, early 90s, right? The art is a little, it's still Ditko art, right? His storytelling. Just the maybe the quality of the line is a little different, when you're drawing for 65 years, and when you hit 90, or I'd say 70, 80s, much less 90, you can have a little slight difference sometimes in hand-eye coordination and such. But I mean, look at this, just this desire of the man to sit there and still conjure up and still want to tell a story, right? Just with his hand and his pen. And this is a great looking page right here, right? All this surrealist type character design and activity. So each one of these books would have like, 4, 5, 6 short stories in it. So is the hero, sometimes they would continue the serials and throughout the book. But, so like they did 26, and there was one more after this, number 27. It was kind of like a wrap up, because this one came out, and I think Ditko passed away after this. So this might be literally like the last new Ditko art published within his lifetime. 27 issues total. So that's not much of a like a final victory lap. It was like a marathon, I say. And for the last 15 issues or so, Robin Snyder and Ditko switched to a Kickstarter model, right? Where they're publicly funded. You pay, you contribute money, and then you get your copy of the comic and any extras. The nice thing is, right, like most Kickstarters, they print the names of the contributors in it, and yeah, there's mine. So it's been cool to see my name as a contributor in about half of these books. And this is I believe this is the latest one, because I think there's one coming out still. So Ditko passed away in 2018, but Snyder is still publishing books, and usually now they're collections of old and new material, right? Here's one from, this one's signed by Robin. The Hero Returns for Javier. Thanks, Robin. Excuse me. Wow. Talk too long without the water. Not a good thing. Anyway. So this collects stuff from the Captain Atom comics, published by Charlton Comics in the 60s. to some of the stuff Ditko's done in the 80s. Boy, I'm sorry. I just got really dry in the throat there. They've been kicking up a lot of dust with some of the older comics. Look at this fascinating character, the Corrector. It's a mask he's wearing, let's assume. It's like a blank face in the middle, and then there's these two sides of him. Kind of like this guy, the enlightened side and then the tortured side. So it's kind of like a little bit of human nature in that character's design. So 65-year career, and it's, you know, it's been great to be been part of it as far as a fan. And also, let me show this really quick. There's like some other artists in the field, Jack Kirby particularly. Ditko's had a fan club spring up around him, or a fanzine, I should say, right? It's like a magazine made by fans, so they call them fanzines. So this Ditko Mania was around in the 80s, and then the original editor was Bob Hall. He stopped doing it, Bill Hall. And then in 2008, this other young Ditko fan, Rob Imes, he asked permission to continue the zine, so he got the permission. So, hey fans, guess who's back? So this was the first issue in, I think, 9 years of Ditko Mania. I don't know how I got this. I may have either heard of it and I ordered it. I probably ordered it. I must have heard about it somewhere. Because Rob's based back east, so I don't think these were out in any shops out here. But so I started picking these up, and it's just basically what you think they are. Just articles by fans on Steve Ditko, and you know, there might be here's a comic story Rob actually drew, but there'd be articles on Ditko, on his various characters, on a particular storyline or a particular, you know, comic he did and what have you. And there's a letters page usually in the back. Here's several issues covered by Mort Todd, another great artist and longtime Ditko fan and collaborator. So eventually, guess what? I did a cover. I did 2 covers actually. One time I just wrote Rob, "Hey, you got the cover for the next issue?" He's like, "No, I'm not yet." You know, and I go, "What's the topic?" And he goes, "Well, it's going to be about Ditko's bouncing heroes, superheroes that he's created over the years that are kind of known for bouncing around, you know, acrobatically flying or flipping or literally bouncing, like Mr. Quiver right here, Killjoy, the Screamer, Speedball, and of course the Creeper, which Ditko created in the 60s at DC. So it was really cool, and I think it was the first time, yeah, I got lucky. It was the first time Rob decided to do a color cover. So, wow, how lucky do I get? I get to do a cover for the zine, but it's the first color one. And then a couple issues later, I did another cover. This was the philosophy issue, which makes sense, right? As much philosophy as Ditko would discuss and demonstrate through his comics, Rob decided to do a whole issue based on topics of philosophy that Ditko would, you know, talk about and such. So there's a cover with Mr. A and the Gray Negotiator, right? There's only black and white, so stay on the right side. Eventually, in 2017, guess what? I put together my own little zine, little Ditko book here. You Don't Know Ditko's, it's called. A primer on the master of the comic arts. It's just one issue I've done so far, right? But I just wanted to really kind of aim this to the general audience. So really give him like try to give him a really good snapshot of who Steve Ditko is. Other than, you know, most people are gonna know him through SpiderMan and of course Doctor Strange, which is fine. You know, people get to know about somebody, but learn about their entire career, not just those 2 things they've done, which are huge. But the man is about so much more, right? I mean, he worked a good 10 years before he worked at Marvel on Spider-Man, and then he's definitely worked decades after leaving Spider-Man. So, again, I wrote these little articles, a rapid review. It's a Ditko comic called Ditko's World Static from 1986. Like, I just literally, it's a 1-minute review of that issue. I did a Ditko comic a few years ago in color, and I printed it in black and white here in the centerfold. Ditko Considered. Again, it's just a microscopic look at the man's career. Right here, I discussed Ditko's design work on his characters. That's one of the things that really interests me about him. Just his amazing knack for character design. So, timeline. And this is it, yeah. You don't know Ditko, but hopefully now you do. But one of the things, besides his art, I mean, the art style is really what attracts you, especially when you're a kid. Like, all you do is look at the art on the comic, right? That's what attracts you to the artist in the first place. And that's what keeps you there over the years. But it's really him going off and self-publishing in the, starting with Mr. A, creator-owned work, I should call it, first and foremost. Because you can do something you create and you can make a deal with a publisher where you keep the rights. So he was interested from the early beginning, right from the late 60s when he created Mr. A, that he wanted to own his work. Here's Mr. A right here. And all these characters he owns, right? Killjoy and everybody. But that, I started learning about that, I don't know when, probably in the, I guess, mid-80s, late 80s, definitely by the early 90s. How important it is to self-publish. And a lot of people have self-published. But the fact that someone who could, be the co-creator of SpiderMan, like, what are the top 3 most famous superheroes, like, of all time, was the Batman, Spider-Man, and Superman. So one of the guys who created Spider-Man, instead of keeping in the limelight, working on corporate characters and such, decided to just do his own thing, right? So always stood by his own convictions, stood to his guns, so to speak, and he basically passed away as an independent creator. So there's a lot to get out of his life, his career, and his art. And I've been spending almost 40 years now, a little more than 40 years, reading his work, collecting it, tracking it down, reading about him, studying, kind of his career path, but really just getting inspired by that dedication to, do your work, do it at your own, your own pace and your own calling, really. So that's a little bit about Steve Ditko. Like I said, we can't share a 65-year career in 30 minutes, but we can get started here and then, check back in with Ditko stuff throughout the course of this channel. So if you like this episode, hit the like button, leave a comment. I always try to, I always appreciate the comments and been answering each one as far as I know, or if not, at least I give you a thumbs up or a little heart. But yeah, and share it. If you got other fans would be interested in this Ditko subject, share it online with them. And of course, subscribe. I always appreciate people subscribe. And always stay tuned for the next episode. So thank you very much. And we will talk again later. Thanks.